What makes young people crazy rave?
I'm curious what makes you so curious.
In the beginning was the beat.
Welcome to the Rave Curious Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Glazer. What are we curious about? We're curious about electronic music and the culture that surrounds it. And how do we satisfy that curiosity? We do it by talking to some people who have dedicated their lives to the electronic music scene, the DJs, producers, promoters, and more. My guest today on the podcast is Kevin McHugh, probably better known as Ambivalent. He also records and performs as Amber and LA-4A. Kevin was a key member in Richie Hawtin's Minus crew, that group of DJs and producers who moved to Berlin in the mid-2000s and really pushed the minimal techno sound into the mainstream. People like Magda, Marc Houle, Troy Pierce, Heartthrob, and Kevin was right in the mix with all of that. He's since gone on to record for labels like Sven Vath's Cocoon and Josh Wink's Ovum, and he also puts out music on his own Delft imprint. A lot of music coming out lately from Kevin. So we recorded this podcast in Berlin, about 7 months ago. I feel terrible it's taken this long for it to come out, but I just listened to it last night, and it's still really interesting. There's nothing in there that's not valid at this point. Kevin's a really smart guy. He approaches techno with a real artistic kind of sensibility. He actually went to art school. So we get into a lot of conversations like that. We also talk about his years at Minus and, of course, what he has going on now. So if you like what you hear, you can follow us on social media. Rave Curious Podcast is on Facebook. We're also on Twitter at Rave Curious. Of course, you can subscribe on iTunes. And if you really, really like the podcast, it would be awesome if you left a review on iTunes. Apparently, it's really essential to help other people find the podcast, and that's kind of what it's all about, spreading the knowledge, spreading love. Right now, we're going to show some love to Kevin McHugh on the Rave Curious Podcast. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so convention time. You were just one of the New York fuckers.
I know.
Which I'm sure you know, like that was literally
we were very unpopular with all of you guys.
Oh, with all of us Detroit guys. Because all of a sudden you were like all standing in the DJ booth and drinking all of our booze. And
your booze.
Well, it was ours before you showed up.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I don't know. The provenance of the booze would be an interesting one to try to determine. But I mean, I was well aware at some point that there was a clique of the original Detroit posse who were not fond of the fact that a bunch of Brooklyn hipsters were kind of
we didn't
suddenly
want to share our plastic man. He was our plastic man. Get your own.
Yeah, well, part of it was that there was part of it had to do with the fact that there was a group of us who were becoming friends in New York with each other, and we all had contacts not just to Rich, but to a bunch of other people, Magda and Marc Houle, and so those guys were friends with Jesse. Jesse was friends with Mike Servito, and Troy was friends with all of those guys, and they were friends with Plexus, and so there were all of these overlaps. And Rich was, of course, one of the overlaps, and so whenever we would be hanging out with Rich in Detroit, suddenly there would be this kind of vibe, I guess we're the
New York fuckers.
Here.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's funny to think about now because at this point, everyone has moved so many different places, and no one's in Detroit anymore.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and part of it was, obviously, I would imagine that all of the New York gang, we sort of probably had a bit of a a bit of a high opinion of ourselves just for the fact that we managed to live in New York.
Like all New Yorkers, yeah.
You know, you think that you're at the center of the universe. And maybe that's something that we have in common with Detroiters when it comes to techno, is that Detroit people tend to believe that like there is no authenticity available outside of the bounds of Detroit.
Of course. So,
unless it's in Ann Arbor or something. I don't know. Somehow that still applies.
Well, that's all the same. That's all still. I mean, the Derek, Juan, and Kevin, technically, Belleville's a lot closer to Ann Arbor than it is to Detroit. So,
I think Detroit.
It's a metro area.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a thing that happens. I think generally in the U.S. is this kind of notion like, when people ask where you're from, you say what the nearest metropolitan center is, as opposed to where you're really from, because like if most people would not understand where Dearborn is, you know what I mean? So people say,
what's the point?
Detroit.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I went to high school in Washington D.C., but it would be phony of me to say I grew up in Washington D.C. because I grew up in the suburbs outside of Washington D.C. It's just that my high school was inside the city. But that would be pretentious to be like, you know, give that whole story if somebody asks. You say, oh, yeah, I'm from here. You know what I mean? And for so many people, for me personally, like, I haven't lived in D.C. since I was 17 years old. Like, where did I really grow up? I grew up there, but I became an adult in New York City.
Okay, so you moved to New York.
Well, I moved
right after high school, or?
I moved to Baltimore. I lived in Baltimore for a couple of years for when I went to art school, and then I dropped out of there and I moved to London and started DJing in London in '95, and then ran out of money and moved back to New York. Moved back to DC, and then got into school in New York and moved to New York in '96.
Okay.
So from '96 until I lived in New York until 2004. That's when I moved to Berlin to work here with Minus and with Rich, and then moved back to New York for a couple of years, and then moved here again in 2008, and I've lived here, or quote-unquote lived here since. I put that in quotes. It's kind of funny to say that because it makes it sound like I don't really live here. I mean, I pay taxes. I pay rent. I pay taxes. I'm legally here, but I'm back and forth a lot. As
right, you know. And your wife's still in New York, right?
Yes.
So,
and we've been doing that for 7 years. We met right before I left and managed to make long distance things work.
So you've been in a relationship the entire time you've lived in Berlin?
The entire time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the smartest thing I've heard or the dumbest thing.
You know, it's really true. It's a very accurate thing, or a very accurate assessment. It's like a lot of people, especially when in the first few years that I lived over here and I was, you know, kind of new on the scene and successful. I'd already done Berlin. I'd done Berlin years before in terms of like coming and going and being single and partying and being wild and stupid and all that stuff. But being on the road, people were like, oh, you know, like, aren't you missing out on something? And I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, the one thing I don't want to do is be the guy that goes to the hotel room in the middle of the night with no one to call the next morning. Like, I actually really, really appreciate having some grounding anchor because it's really disorienting on the road. Like, not sensorially, but you can really lose your grounding as to who you are or what you're about or what matters in life. I mean, I'm sorry to get all like, you know, Hallmark and cheesy about it.
Please.
But having somebody who doesn't give a shit about whether you're cool or not or whether you're up or down, because it's a business that's very fickle, and it's a business where your popularity can bring or take things to you or from you, and having somebody in your life that doesn't have any value of that but actually values you for who you are is like, it's hard to replace that. So the fact that they're like a phone call away as opposed to like, you know, only a couple 100 miles away, is like, it's not that different.
That seems to be a common theme with a lot of your peers. And when I say your peers, I say like the people who I know.
You
like
mean old men in techno?
Well, even more specifically, you know, people like who were like in and around Minus and, you know, the mid 2000s, like, you know, the New York people who all came to Berlin around the same time. You know, I think of like, you know, obviously like Marc Houle and Jesse and, you know, just our group of friends and, you know, this peer group.
Yeah.
There has seemed to been for everybody a little bit of a bumpy ride the past few years, and it seems like everyone's on the up now. Everyone's like kind of actively doing stuff. But am I wrong to say that it's been a little
Bumpy.
I
think for everybody, there's been a huge set of changes, and at different times. So I think that probably on some level makes it look bumpier because it's like, oh, this person's doing this or this person's changed that, and it's not all this sort of synchronous end. And I think in that way it's more natural. Like everybody's just kind of taken their own paths, and I think in fact, it was actually quite unnatural for everybody to be so tied together in one thing. And I think that warped people's sense of each of us individually. For sure. And it warped ideas of how artists can work in this business. I think there were a lot of things about the way that that's ended that have been actually quite natural and beneficial to the scene and to each person individually. I mean, I guess the take line headway is like, Kevin says Minus was unhealthy and unnatural. But in some ways it was. I mean, I think that there were some aspects of that were not the normal way of things going, and I think that it's good that that's not still the case. I think there were a lot of people that took their idea from that notion that's like, okay, you get a little clique of people together and then you just go out and storm the gates. And I don't necessarily know that is the right way for artists to develop.
Interesting. And I guess in a way it's almost like, even though you're all performing separately, it's almost like the dynamic almost is you're a band in that, you're touring together, you're traveling together, you're thought of as this, overall brand, and then if the band breaks up, then it's like, oh, what does the guitarist do? What does the drummer do? Like, it's almost, in a lot of ways, it's sort of that dynamic because you're thought of as a package.
And I gotta say, I always resented that. I mean, initially I liked the idea of being part of a group of like-minded friends who got to tour a lot together and share a lot of ideas and such. But this isn't really, I mean, there's something about it that it started to be perceived a bit like Menudo, in this weird way. And I felt allergic to that. That made me itch. It made me really uncomfortable, and I struggled with that for a while before I left, up until I left, and was part of. I think it was one of the reasons why I just didn't feel like, because I never felt like I fit. I'm one of those people that doesn't really ever feel like I fit in anywhere, and being seen as fitting into something from outsiders actually rubs me a little bit awkwardly,
And it's funny because it's definitely something you like. Marc said something to me. Marc Houle, he was like, when he put out his last record, he was almost. We were talking about journalists or whatever, but the joke was he should call his album 3.5 stars, because no matter what he records,
I don't think he's the only person. I mean,
the reviews are gonna get 3.5 stars because no matter what anyone from Minus does, it's gonna get a respectable 3.5 stars. And
I think that actually has. I think if you talk to anybody in this business, they would probably say the same. I don't. Not about Minus artists. I think they would say the same about themselves. I think everybody in this business struggles with a lot of the same things. I don't think it's unique to artists who are associated with that label. It's a running joke on forums and such that certain websites always give the 3.5 stars, and I know RA has worked hard to change their system so that they don't just repeat that formula over and over. But I think that's across the board, and that's kind of a bigger question about how music gets received and how artists get understood by the people who kind of digest it and represent it. I don't know about calling it journalists, because that makes it sound like they're, like out there with a stenographer's pad, like, figuring out what happened on the scene today. I think that the people who are critics in this scene, I don't call it an industry, I'd rather call it a scene, because I think the people who write about music are not doing this to like get a check. They're doing this because they're lovingly engaged in the music, and they actually really care about it, and this is their way of engaging. Is that they're a lot of the people who write reviews are the same people who are record shopping. They're doing the same thing. They're going through the stacks of what came out this week and going, oh, this is cool. And this relates to what this person has done 5 times in the past by being either a departure from that or a continuation of that, or it's, you know, superior to the thing that the guy did before or the girl did before, or it's inferior to what he or she did before. That sorting out is something that all of us do. And I think writers do that. And I think that the 3.5 thing kind of comes from, I think it comes from just like not wanting to be too harsh and also not wanting to be too...
Not getting really excited.
Because like a 3 out of 5 would be underwhelming and a 4 out of 5 would be overwhelming. So anywhere in between is like, you know... I mean, do you remember the Source magazine and like what it was like to get like 5 mics in the Source? It was like this chalice, you know, that was unreachable. It was Mount Olympus. And so the fact that we have something like that in this business is, or in this scene, is really cool.
Yeah. Well, and the other reality is, I think, you know, well, 2 things. One, this music in particular doesn't necessarily resonate on a, you know, song by song basis or even an album by album basis.
But it does on a record by record, don't you think?
I could say honestly that like some of my best friends, whenever they play me music, they're like, I've been working on this, and in my head I'm just like 3.5. Like,
what's wrong with that?
But then if I hear them play it out,
okay,
then all of a sudden I'm like this record's great. What is this?
Oh, but see, that's actually the most important. That's a huge factor, right? Because context is everything, particularly to this music. It's not a like verse, chorus, verse.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
It's functional music. It's you know, like we always call ourselves artists, but the truth is that we're designers. The difference between a designer and an artist is that a designer has to make something to suit a specific function. An artist can do whatever the hell they want. They can pour rubber in the corner and that's art. They can smear gasoline on the wall and that's art. There's no boundaries and it doesn't have to be something functional. It can mount your sofa if you want it to, but it doesn't have to. This music has to be playable in a DJ set and function in a dancing context on some level.
Yeah, and that's just, I like the designer idea. I've always referred to it more as like artisans or craftsmen, but same idea.
Yeah,
it's like you're making a high quality product of sorts.
And
but there's
space for genius in that. I mean, like Philippe Starck is one of these people who like he makes toothbrushes that are ridiculous toothbrushes, but you can still use them as a toothbrush. They're incredible and artful. He can design all of these things that are in some ways very signature. They're very obviously his sort of look or his aesthetic, but it still works. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between him and, you know, I don't know, Isamu Noguchi. Well, no, Noguchi's a terrible example because he made tables. But, you know, like, or, you know, him and Henry Moore, you know, like the idea that like a sculpture does anything more than just be there to be looked at and perceived and understood. If it does anything more than that, then it's not sculpture anymore. It's a functional tool, and a functional tool is designed by a designer. However many liberties that designer takes is up to them. This is why, I don't know if you've ever seen this, speaking of reviewing, but there's sort of a funny art to interpreting the descriptions that record stores give a record, particularly Hardwax, right? So Hardwax, if Hardwax calls your record like a something DJ tool, like, you know, big techno DJ tool, some people, some producers take that as an insult when in fact it's actually like just a very frank statement of like, this is something that's very usable for a DJ when playing. It's not like an insult.
A lot of Jeff Mills' best tracks were called Purpose Maker.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
They were purposefully made for that. It's fine, and disagree. Your art school is totally showing, by the way.
Yeah, it totally is.
What did you go to art school for?
I started.
What was your specialty?
I spent 2 years at art school trying not to paint or draw anything. I spent a couple of years at art school trying to like figure out what was going on in like very, very contemporary art, and I found out that all the stuff that they were teaching in art school was like totally bogus. It was like, I don't need to sit here and paint fruit. Like nobody in New York is painting fruit right now. Like, why am I wasting my time? And so
Do you still believe that?
Do I still believe that nobody paints fruit?
Or that you don't have to learn to paint fruit?
Actually, that's a really interesting question, because at that time, I was thinking specifically about the art world, but I wasn't really coming from a creative place. I was more about this 19-year-old ambition about like, oh, I want to go out and figure out what's cool and be a part of it. But as I've developed a studio practice as a musician, I've realized that like learning the craft is really key. Like learning the rules, understanding the rules before you break them. I mean, I was a punk rocker. I was a kid from DC. Like I saw, all these punk bands in DC who knew one power chord that you could slide to different positions on the neck. Like you learn one thing and you're a musician, and that was cool. And punk and techno had that same energy. It's like you don't have to have a music degree from Berkeley to do those one finger melodies on a synthesizer.
Right.
And it's powerful and it's immediate and it's raw and it's interesting and it's something that nobody who's anything more than 5 years older than you would understand. I mean, this is what 1993 was like, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, 1993 I was graduating high school and going to raves and in Baltimore and DC, and it was like, wow, like this is like something else. And it was like the punk scene. You go and you meet kids who don't feel like they fit in other places, and you go and you listen to this music that alienates anyone who is not like you, and you feel like you found your home.
And that was such a good scene at that point. I mean, that was like Discord at its most
powerful,
like the Black Cat Club. And I never went to DC, but I was like, from Detroit watching what was going on there.
And DC had a lot of different things besides that going for it that I think people don't kind of pick up on. Like DC had go-go music, which didn't really go very far outside of DC. I think some people in the UK picked up on it. Some like real heads, like people who really like seek out different forms of music.
Around like the mid 2000s when like Baltimore Club became known outside of Baltimore. Next they're like, okay, well like right next door to that is DC Go-Go, and it's very similar to like Booty House or Ghetto Tech in Detroit,
right? But those are in some ways still viewed as regional.
Yeah.
They didn't translate beyond those things. And in the early 90s when I was, sneaking out of my parents' house, like we would listen to go-go on the radio on our way into the city, go to a hardcore show at like 8 p.m. in literally there'd be like a repurposed bar with a PA system stuck at the back, and an all ages show with hand stamps and big X's on your hand and shit, and then from there we would go to Trax, which was in Southeast, which at the time Southeast DC was the murder capital of the world and Southeast was the murder capital of DC, but Trax was this massive place where you could, if you had an even passable fake ID, you could get in. And there was Scott Henry in the big room playing like acid house and more ravey kind of stuff as well around like 92, 92, 93 was when I started going there. When did Trax close? Trax closed and then Capitol Ballroom opened sometime after that, but I think that might have been a little later. And then a friend of mine in high school, one of my friends, would DJ in the sort of industrial and goth and EBM room, and we would go in there and listen to like Nitzareb, and then we go into the other room and listen to acid house. So like in one night you could hear like hip hop and go-go on the radio, because we were white kids from the suburbs, right. So we weren't going to go-go concerts, although EU did play at my prom, and that was a highlight for me, so I got to listen to Doing the Butt
That's amazing.
at my prom. But like DC was super segregated in that way. But you took pieces from all these different things. Like all of that stuff felt, at least when I was 17, 18 years old, it felt like it was all one continuum. It didn't feel like these people listen to this, these people listen to that, you're cool if you like this, you're not cool if you like that. It was like all of one strain. Because Skinny Puppy and Nitzareb and Plastic Man and all these other people used the same drum machines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so did Mantronics, and so did LL Cool J, and it's like it was like the same 5 machines being used to make all of this stuff. And there were cultural boundaries maybe between them, but when you're 17 years old, you're absorbing,
But was there, because I remember we graduated high school the same year.
Okay.
Very, very parallel. Detroit, we had the same thing. We had Ghetto Tech on the radio.
Yeah.
On the way to the indie rock concert before going to the Rave or whatever. But I felt like there was definitely still, at least between the guitar music scene and the electronic music scene. Like, I just think we remember one of my indie rock friends throwing my Terry Mullen mixtape out of my car window. That summer when I discovered, techno music, and that was all I wanted to play in the car, and it was the last thing he wanted to hear.
I mean, there's always going to be that, right? I think there's still that now, and there probably was that back then, that people really hang their identity on the tribe that they decided they belong to. But if you really love music, then you don't see it that way. You just kind of, you absorb it. I mean, I still think that some of the best produced electronic music right now is like some of the new hip hop that I'm hearing, and like that doesn't mean to me that like there's a boundary between me and that. Of course, like that's culturally something very different, but it doesn't mean that musically it's any less interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back for saying that.
I totally understand what you're saying.
But the people who would say like, oh, I don't listen to hip hop, I only listen to Biggie Smalls and stuff. It's like, well, or the people who are like, oh, I don't listen to country. It's like, well, you're fucking missing out. Like, you're missing out really big if you think that certain people like this and certain people like that, and you just only stay in your lane, then you're...
I mean, I feel like that's probably not so common these days. I mean,
I hope.
But like back in the 90s, it's like...
So your sense was that actually it was more... See, that's the funny thing. In my sense was it was completely not polarized, and I'm maybe idealizing it on some level, but I think my subjective experience was that you could listen to anything and that it was all of an ilk, whereas you got the opposite perception during that same time. Is that right?
Well, to an extent. I had a funny... just my interaction with it was I turned 16 in 1991, the year punk broke.
Right.
According to the Sonic Youth movie, and
right.
Nirvana, and just like everything happened, and then it took like maybe 2-3 years for the techno thing to blossom in Detroit, or start to with the first Packard parties and all that.
Right.
And then I just basically went my senior year in high school, freshman year in college. I had a girlfriend who became a raver and like left me for the rave, and so that like
that should be an album title. Like, she left me for the rave.
Took me back a few years, before I could
see
go
it
in.
Fresh, yeah.
But there was no way not to, because at the time, like the post-punk, post-hardcore Fugazi stuff that I loved was like starting to make way for like the post-rock stuff, and I literally remember reading an interview with John McEntire when the first Tortoise album came out, and him mentioning drum and bass. And literally having no concept of what that meant.
Oh,
like,
really?
What is that? Because, I mean, there was no internet.
Right.
And I called a friend in Detroit, because I was in East Lansing. I was, at school. I was like, literally, pick up the phone and call his friend, be like, so I'm in this interview, and he's, do you know what this drum and bass genre is that he's talking about that's happening in England? And he's like, well, he didn't want to say he didn't know. He's like, well, I assume it probably, just has some rhythm and some low end. And, then I go to the local store and be like, hey, what is,
Oh, cool.
You show me this stuff. So it ended up colliding anyway.
Did drum and bass, I've never, this is something that I didn't know because I only learned about drum and bass because I've lived in London in 95. So that was, it was literally like, you couldn't miss it. That was like,
it was huge there.
Sort of apex moment there. But for Detroit, it's funny. I never hear any of my Detroit friends talk about the drum and bass era, because also I moved from after living in London, I then later lived in New York, and New York was having a moment 96, 97 where even into 98 where like drum and bass was really central. Like some of the biggest parties in New York were drum and bass regular nights there, so it was still super big, and everybody had this sense like this is the future, right? It was like this is where music is going. This is the final, most intelligent, most, interesting development in music and specifically electronic music and in dance and DJ culture. It didn't pan out that way, but it was really perceived that way for a couple of years. But I don't know if it was in Detroit.
No, it really wasn't. And it's funny you bring up like exactly like that era, because I went to Concrete Jungle.
Oh yeah.
In New York in 90, because it would have been summer of 98.
Okay.
I was in New York for 2 weeks.
Did you go to Coney Island High? Was it there?
Couldn't possibly tell you.
It was like a death trap room, dark room
No,
upstairs.
I remember this being like a legitimate venue.
No, I mean a legitimate venue, but like kind of a little bit creepy, like dark on St. Mark's Place.
I really don't know, but I don't remember. I don't remember anything particular about the venue that made it stand out. As in, like it was rough.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that. It's been so down on Coney Island.
Wow.
It was a cool place. It just always had sort of a skeevy vibe there because there were.
I just remember being so impressed by like. It felt like everyone there like went to fashion school or art school. Like it was a very progressive, plugged in.
But that's
scene.
That. I mean, I gotta say, like, you know, me and my wife talk about this all the time. Being like, you know, the age that we are and having moved to New York both around that same time, there was something really electric happening in New York in the mid to late 90s. It was like this, and of course I'm sure there was before that, but just that we moved there. I moved there in 96 and she probably moved there. We didn't know each other then, but she was there around the same time. But those first years that I was in New York, it was just so electric. It was so raw. There was something happening all the time, and part of it was that it wasn't just music. It was like everything. You had the Sound Lab guys this whole like what was called the ambient scene, which was this like really interesting, arty, experimental, electronic. It was dance music, but it was electronic and it was ambient and it was all of these things. And brilliant producers and DJs who were a part of it, and they were working with people who made clothes and people who made installations. And the Sound Lab events were these like multi-level kind of multidisciplinary happenings that were happening in fucking like warehouses in Dumbo, you know. And that was like that was kind of like the dream that everybody thought was happening in Detroit.
Yeah, no, it was funny because Detroit, you know, we had our techno thing, and very specific our techno thing, and then summer '98, I go to New York. Me and Johnny O go to New York. We produced this like experimental theater piece that was like had like techno music, and it was
Where was that?
It was part of we were in the Fringe Festival.
Oh,
you remember
okay.
that?
Yeah.
And so we were out there for 2 weeks, had like 7 shows, an hour each, and then all this time to kill. And so we're just running around the city. It's funny you bring up the ambient thing, because I have a vague memory of being drunk at, was it Orchard Bar?
Okay.
Was that the name of the place with like the big tree growing in the middle? Mm-hmm. And gave some drunken shit talking with some dude. Not like bad shit talking, but just like...
Yeah.
And then he walks away and John's like, you do know that was DJ Spooky, right?
Oh, okay.
But no idea that was DJ Spooky.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, going to Concrete Jungle, and then like a few days later being... Where's some like... I just remember it was a bar that had like to go downstairs. The entire stairwell was mirrored, like little like mirrored tiles, whatever. And Odie was DJing down there. It was his birthday, and he's doing like scratching drum and bass on 3 turntables. I was like, the fuck is this? And so we came back to Detroit. This would have been fall of '98. So hyped on drum and bass, and so hyped on all this stuff we had picked up, and we had built a relationship with Motor at that point, because the play that we did, we actually we did a run in Detroit at Motor, like like Thursday, Friday, Saturday before the club opened. We would do the play, and then tear everything down, and then the club would start. So we get back to Detroit, we're hanging out, and the next thing we go to Motor, and we're like, we want to do a drum and bass night. Because there had never been a drum and bass night. I think John Lane, who used to do the Intuit Solar stuff, maybe beat us to the punch by a week or two. They did a drum and bass party somewhere, but we were definitely we picked up this thing in New York. We want to do this.
Right.
We got Paris the Black Foo from Detroit Grand Poobahs before Detroit Grand Poobahs had a drum and bass collection, and Punisher the techno DJ,
Yeah.
had a good drum and bass collection.
Cool.
So they were like, yeah, we'd love to do it. They gave us the side room of Motor on Thanksgiving Eve, which is the busiest bar night of the year.
Wow.
In a place like Detroit, because it's, it's a city where
Yeah.
everyone comes back for the
back
holiday.
in. Yeah.
It was Frankie Bones playing in the big room.
Wow.
I want to say the first time Frankie Bones played Motor. So it was like a huge
Wow.
deal. And they're like, take the side room, do what you want. But yeah, we did a drum and bass night. And nah, dude, just...
I
It
think
didn't
that,
work. It
I
didn't
think
work.
that part of it is that's a result, I think, in some ways of what people love about Detroit is that like the groove of techno, the attitude, but also just the whole philosophy and that rhythm, that way of moving and dancing and listening is just, it's in the water in Detroit in some way that I would imagine you would really have to sell Detroiters on that for a long time before you could get them into it. It would not be an instant one night pickup.
Well, and it was also, I think from our standpoint, it was just like all the, hot fashion school girls that we met in New York were replaced by like juggalos. And like that was kind of the
that wasn't
people...
a thing then, though, was it? That wasn't a thing then.
Oh yeah.
Was it really?
Sure, oh, for sure. Yeah, Insane Clown Posse was definitely a thing. Even
Back
at that
then?
point, yeah.
Really?
I think you had like Kid Rock still doing like hip hop and I mean, whatever. The point is, it was blue collar, kind of white trash, whatever you want to call it, wiggers, whatever you want to call it. Like, that was the scene. That one little drum and bass scene there was, that was kind of the crowd, which was so not what we were looking for. We wanted to be these like urbane hipsters.
Oh, I see.
So it was just, we were just like, okay, yeah, never mind. We'll go back to promoting techno, or we'll start promoting techno. But the first party we ever threw was technically a drum and bass.
So were the Detroit parties extremely white?
Motor was very white.
Really?
Yeah, Motor was completely white.
Okay.
I mean, obviously there's always going to be a few, like scene people and, DJs who would come through.
Okay.
But yeah, the crowd was white, suburban.
Interesting.
It wasn't until like some of the very earliest things I went to in I was still in high school, so we're talking like 91, 92.
Yeah.
I remember walking into 1515 Broadway, which was this, kind of like a classic black box venue in Detroit from like the early years. I was like 17, and I took my 15-year-old girlfriend and 3 of her 15-year-old girlfriends, and we walked into this thing, and it was like if it was a movie, you would have heard the needle go off the record, because we were 4 white kids just walked into this all black, black box party. But we were so like, I didn't even understand that there was like a DJ at that point. I didn't even understand that like somebody played records.
But were you? I mean, did you have the sense you were unwelcome? Is that what you mean?
We didn't stay long.
Okay.
But it wasn't because we weren't. It wasn't. We didn't have a good experience or a bad experience. It was just one of those things like you stumble in, you look around, you're like, okay, this is
just a sense that you didn't fit.
Right, exactly. And probably someone had a curfew, someone had to go home.
This is the thing that I've never really been able to kind of get my head around in terms of understanding Detroit, because for as much time as I've spent there, I've never really fully grasped within the techno scene, within the music scene, how the dynamics of identity that are part of everything in the U.S., how those permeate into a scene where it's black music that's been adopted by, or not adopted, but it's been enjoyed by white audiences. And I've always had the assumption, and maybe it's idealized, that everybody's all good and there's just like a great intermingling, because when I've been there for the festival, it's usually a decent balanced mix. There's a lot of white kids that come in from outside of the Detroit area, that come from greater Michigan or the greater Midwest, but that you can tell that there's a broad section of people from Detroit that come out to represent Detroit in whatever way, and it's not as like...
I mean, I can't speak to Detroit now, really, because I haven't been for so long.
No, but I'm thinking.
But yeah,
more
back
about
then
the years
it was.
back then.
There was definitely, and any of the old black DJs will tell you, like, in the mid, early mid, like 93, 94, like when Rich really started to get rolling, then all of a sudden all the white kids from the suburbs were just like flocking to his parties which was a crowd that wasn't there before.
Oh, that's interesting.
But also, you gotta remember, we're talking about really, really small numbers. We're talking about, at its peak, like the Music Institute was, what, a 300-person venue?
Right.
Couldn't have been bigger than that. I never went. I'm not old enough, but could not have been bigger than that. The big parties in Detroit, 1,000 people.
So how many people would go to like a party at the Packard plant or something?
Maybe 1,000, maybe 2.
That's still pretty solid for a city the size of Detroit.
It is, but it's still, it's still so underground and such a microcosm. I vaguely remember, because I went to 2 or 3 Packard plant parties, one of them in like 94, again, before I even really knew that there was a DJ playing records. I think like my band had played some dive bar in Detroit, and afterwards someone was like, "Do you want to go here?"
Okay.
And then I went back in 96 once I kind of caught on.
I see.
But it was definitely, it felt like a white suburban phenomenon.
Okay.
And it wasn't until later that we discovered, and you would hear, and how much of it's true or not true, but like this black DJ, doesn't like this white DJ, and there's, I'm sure that stuff had to exist because A, it always exists.
Sure.
And B, we're talking about 20-year-old, 20 people in their mid-20s.
Yeah.
With egos competing over stuff. It's just
interesting for me because my perspective, I don't really have so much experience with a local scene, or I didn't have experience with a local scene until I was promoting in New York much later on. In fact, when I started doing the festivals that I did for Creative Time in the basement, or the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, even then I wasn't really involved directly with the local DJ scene. I was working with other promoters who would help us, because I'd be like, okay, we want this kind of stuff. We want a drum and bass party this night. We want a techno party this night. We want experimental music this night. And I was from an overview, like doing that, but I wasn't down to like, okay, well, we can't book this guy because he's got beef with that guy. Like that was never my thing. And then it wasn't until like mid 2000s, early 2000s, like 2002, 2003, that I started booking stuff locally. It's just that that was such a small thing because that was specifically about minimal techno. But the New York scene was such a massive thing, and it was so competitive and so internationalized that there wasn't really time for anybody to have like scraps over like who belonged where or who had what. It was like everybody was just like out for self, whatever you can do, and it didn't matter.
It's a bigger pie.
It's a bigger pie, and there's just lots more people competing for it, and most of them aren't from there. So you're not like, you don't know each other's history as much. There's not as much background. And therefore the politics don't matter. It's just literally like, fuck you, I'm taking this, or like this is a gig I want, and that kind of stuff would be the case, as opposed to the sort of much more internalized kind of beefs that I've always seen from as an outsider that happened.
Well, yeah, it's because everybody's from the same place, and everybody, you keep everyone in the same room long enough, they're going to start fighting.
Right.
But let me ask you this, because one of the things I used to always say was like, one of the nice things about Detroit is if you wanted to do something. Like as much as there was competition and there was kind of infighting, if you want to do something, if you want to do anything, you could find a group of people that were down to help, because everyone just desperately wanted stuff to happen.
Something to happen, yeah.
Because there could easily be a weekend where there was nothing happening.
Sure.
So if anyone who wanted to do anything,
I think people
where I felt like if we it's someplace like New York, there was so much competition. I mean, how did you start promoting in New York? And
that there is a huge difference there, because you're right that there's so much in New York, but there's also like everybody has so much on the line all the time that nobody's going to give you a shot unless you are guaranteed to make it work.
Right. So how did you get to that?
I had a really unique experience. I had been DJing in London in '95, and then went back and DJed a little bit in DC before I moved to New York. And when I landed in New York and started going to school there, I went to an internship fair and met the people who run Creative Time, which is a public arts organization. And they annually, at that time, were doing exhibitions inside this cavernous space inside the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's these giant brick, closed off underground brick chambers that are like 55 feet high and 100 feet long and 20 feet wide. And there's like 8 of these chambers, like with like walls that are like 10 feet thick, brick and stone.
It's inside a bridge.
It's inside the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah. And so they were doing this, and the year before I met them, they had just started adding music events to their art series. And so I started interning for them, and the first thing I said to them was like, oh, you need to stop booking rock bands. Like, nobody cares. Like, everybody my age is like selling their guitars, and they're, you know, like, everybody wants turntable. Like, DJing is where it's at. And they had this mission at the time, which was like, you know, fusing technology and art into public art. So their whole thing was doing exhibitions using public space or public domain and using young living artists. And then they wanted to add to that using technology in some way in the public sphere was an important thing. It was a very cutting edge kind of set of ideas. And I was like, well, if that's the case, then you need to do electronic music. And they were like, great. Do you want to help us do that? So I ended up helping program that in 97, and I did it up until our last music series that I worked on with them was 2001. So, I mean, I did everything except for 98, and I helped a little bit in 98, but I was working in the art world in 98. That was why I was working for them, because I wanted to be in the art world. I didn't have aspirations to work in electronic music. I didn't know you could.
Right.
But I found my way in doing that. But anyway, in 2001, we had to stop because our last one was in summer of 2001, and we did it, and then 2 months later, September 11th happened, and the Giuliani administration just shut down all public access to public spaces. I mean, never mind that you would have to drive a tractor trailer full of dynamite into this space to do
but
anything.
No one can come within.
But it was like
any
immediately
distance
everything got shut down.
Yeah.
So that ended. But the fact that I'd done these massive parties where, you know, like we had Mac, who ran Concrete Jungle. Like, we invited Mac to come in and like help us book DJs that we wanted. Because I was like, oh, I hear a lot about this Detroit techno stuff. Let's get some Detroit techno DJs. Right. And Mac was our conduit to like book Carl Craig, you know. And so like that was how the first time I saw Carl Craig play. And that was like probably 98, something like that. And like, I just remember the first year I did it, I was like at a Sonic Youth show, and I like snuck backstage and talked to Thurston Moore. And I was like, hey, I work for Creative Time and we do this thing. Do you guys want to do something? Like, so naive. Like, I mean, just, you know, 21 years old, like just blagging my way into something. And they were like, yeah. And I just remember a week later, like they were there with their daughter Coco in a station wagon looking at the space. And like, they came and did this amazing 4-part experimental instrumental show where they collaborated with all these amazing musicians in 3 different stages spread across, and it was unbelievable. So we did all of this amazing stuff. So because I had done that, later I was able to go to a club, Filter 14, in the meatpacking district, and say to them, like, look, here's what I want to do. Here's what I've done before. I know how to promote. I know how to organize. If I don't even have to, like, the fact that I don't have to bring in electricians and a lighting rig and a sound system makes it even easier for me. I want to book these DJs who are playing this like kind of weird minimal post-Detroit, like sort of German style of minimal tech. This was 2002. I mean, this is how I explained what was called minimal at that time. And they were like, it's your funeral, go for it, you know, like put down a bar guarantee, you know, like, and I put down my entire month's income as the bar guarantee. Mm-hmm. And then whatever savings I had was like to guarantee the booking fees or, you know, the DJ fees. And then fucking promoted the hell out of a party. And the first gig was Acufin and the first ever live set by Heartthrob.
Wow, okay.
You know, and then I did like, you know, a Magda show. I did a Matthew Deere show where Matt, like, that was the first time Matt ever played any Audion material out, you know, like, so it was that kind of, so I did that. And then later moved to Berlin, and then after I came back from Berlin, I was able to like talk my way into doing something at APT, which was also in the meatpacking district, and so I was just able to do it. And just the fact that like I was stupid enough and optimistic enough to do it, I did it and because also I knew a lot of people in the techno scene at that point from the other stuff that I'd done.
Yeah, it does kind of build upon itself.
And that's what, that's the thing, is like there's no magic key to this business. It's just being around long enough to meet enough people, do enough stuff, take enough risks, lose enough money enough times, and learn hard lessons, and then you're in, and you know people, and you can do something, and later you do something and you don't lose money, and then you keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's how I said, we did a play that got 30 people. I think maybe 100 people came to the opening night, then 30 people the next night, 30 people the night after that.
But you probably met people in that you...
Yeah, and then we did a drum and bass party that no one liked.
Right.
And then we did our whole idea was we would decorate, just decorate the shit out of shit. We did a party where it's like we went and spent $1,000 at Home Depot, and this was all at Motors. Like, they would give us just these weird nights and be like, yeah, sure, here's $1,000. Like, yeah. Try not to lose it all at once.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they hired us to run the club and do the bookings and promotions.
That's amazing. But I mean, I think
that's... we've lost money on everything we've done with you.
That's our guarantee that we're the right guys.
Yeah, exactly. Trust us.
But there is something to that's also like, people trust you, not necessarily always. That's something actually I think that's not common in New York, whereas I think it is a bit more common in places like the Midwest and other places in the U.S., is that like people trust you if you know something, and they don't really care about your scoreboard. They're not looking at your wins and losses. They just believe that you know something that they don't know. So fuck it, you're the guy.
From my experience, I say that's fair.
Whereas in New York, it's like you could be the world's greatest connoisseur of XYZ, but if you've lost money for somebody in the past, nobody's going to let you touch their money again. Yeah. And it's everything is high stakes in New York in that way.
Exactly. There's a lot more to lose.
So the only way around that for me was to like put my own money up. And literally, like, I just remember paying my rent, giving my rent money to a DJ a couple of times, because I was like, well, all right, and that's what being a promoter is like, unfortunately.
And now let me ask you this, so now that you're on the other side. Yeah. Because you made the transition, I guess, when you moved back to Berlin.
2000, I was still living in New York when my first records came out. So 2006, I put out a record with my friend Camilla on her label, Clink. And I was still really tight with Rich and Magda and Troy in that whole time, and was just giving them anything I made because I was just amusing myself, like at that point I had a good job, so I could buy gear, and I was buying gear and learning how to make stuff and sending them the stuff I was making for shits and giggles. And something happened where suddenly something was great and they wanted it and they put it out, and it became a big thing on that label when that label was the big thing that people were listening to. And suddenly it was like, well, okay, if I'm going to do this,
the opportunity doesn't get
this train doesn't come back. Like it's leaving now. Get on it or don't. So I did, and so that was when I transitioned over from. I mean, because at that point I was probably still booking gigs when I had my first records out. For clubs in New York.
And I guess what I want to ask you is, and then we'll finish by talking about your music.
Sure.
We'll close with that that last decade of your life.
That's fine. But it's not the most important thing.
But when you're on the other side, when you're a DJ, have you had those moments where you're taking this kid's rent money?
I have. I've given a lot of money back. I'm gonna regret saying that because I try not to. I don't want to be the guy that's like always an easy mark for like, oh, I had a bad night and like, but I'm enormously sympathetic to what promoters do if I get the sense that that's someone who's doing it for the love. There are a shitload of people in this who are like keeping the machine running, and they're up one night, they're down the next night, but it's a business and the business all works out. But I can spot the kid as soon as I meet them who is doing this because they just really love the artists that they're booking. They're trying to build something in the town that they're working in or in the club that they're working with. And if they did everything right and it just didn't work out, I'm not going to be the guy that's like, tough break, kid, see ya. Like, I try not to, unless it's like me that night, this is my rent money or this is your rent money. And then my New Yorker comes out and it's like, hey kid, it's a tough world.
Sorry, kid, see you later.
Dog eat dog world. What can I tell you? But it's like, But for the most part, like, I'm extremely sympathetic on the and I've seen the other side of it.
Yeah.
Not that people have done it to me, but I've seen a lot of artists who treat promoters like ATM machines. It's like, hey, like I want some whatever, I want this, or I want like I need this kind of champagne, and it's like, well, somebody has to pay for that. Like, the money that you're getting paid comes out of what the club pulls in at the door and at the bar, and there's staff that needs to get paid, and there's light bills and electric bills and rent, and everything comes from somewhere. It's a business. And you're not like the princess who arrived to town and all the subjects just give their tribute to you. Like, you are
you're a cog of this.
You're part of the thing.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, truth be told, maybe people are too nice to say it, but if it doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't work because you asked for too much or you took too much home. I don't ever want to be the guy that everybody's like, yeah, we would have done all right that month if if Kevin hadn't come through.
Yeah. Well, and I saw a lot of DJs like particularly in like the crash, the early 2000s, when like Motor closed and Twilo closed and whatever the big club was, like, that when that wave totally crashed, I saw so many DJs price themselves out.
Yeah.
Because there was this attitude of like, and I don't know if it was the DJs or the booking agents, but it was like, well, we could play, we could pay, your club wants to give us this much. We could go to this other club that's going to pay us a little more. So maybe you want to match that. We're like, well, we know how many people are going to come through the door, and it's just not going to pay for itself.
Right.
So we're going to have to do it. There were times we did do it because a half full club that loses this much is better than a completely empty club, and and it's great until our club closes, and now there's only one club, and so that club doesn't have to pay as much because you can't. And I saw a lot of DJs like. So we kind of not have careers, and sure. I had a lot of trouble feeling sympathetic for a lot of them because it was...
And, this whole, like, supermodel idea of, like, I don't get out of bed for less than X it's a fatal idea. It's like, well, then why are you doing this? Like, at the end of the day, I will go and play music where I can go and play music, and as long as I can continue to make a living, I will continue to do it. I don't want to get hosed, like I don't want somebody inviting me for, half of what I can make on something because they're going to go and, like make another payment on their Mercedes,
sure.
Like it should be fair, but that's the thing. Fairness is determined by a really honest assessment of what's really going on. And some DJs are not capable of being honest with themselves, or some DJs agents are not capable of being honest with that artist. But the idea that, like, you get your take regardless of what anybody else makes, I think in some ways comes from a period where there were, especially in the US, there were some really shady rave promoters who pulled some real gamey shit, so people got their defenses up, right? And it's that classic story.
There's still DJs who need the cash in an envelope before they pull a record out of their bag.
Listen, I'll be honest, there's nights that I do that too.
Yeah.
It's all about, like, it's all about when you get in and you get the vibe, like, shit's going weird, don't leave without the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, there's no formula to it, and nobody can consistently always be one way or the other, right? I'm sure that guys who are normally all about the money go to play for their friend, and it's like, it's all good. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you're playing for people that you have no idea if they did the right stuff to promote this, if there's a lot of things that seem wrong with the night, or you can't get a straight answer out of somebody about something, all of a sudden your little, like, spidey sense goes off, and you're like, right, I got to pay rent this month. I'm not going to be a sucker. Like,
sure,
I'm going to at least get something, so I walk home with something. And the easiest way to not have that be awkward is to just standardize it, where it's like, hey, look, we've got to have this done. Let's just get it out of the way now, and then it's all dealt with, as opposed to at the end of the night where you've already played your set and you have no leverage.
Yeah.
And you can't be like, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, it's like, well, we already got everything we needed, Yeah. So a lot of DJs...
And if you give a shit, you're going to have to find your own ride to the airport, too.
So it's understandable that a lot of people are really matter-of-fact about it, because it is a business transaction. It's not always a business transaction, though. And on some level, anybody who's committed their life to doing this knows that there's no fucking pension fund. There's no fucking like DJ security. You do this and you're probably only going to be able to do it, and if you're lucky, you'll be able to do it into your late 40s.
Right.
And if you're really lucky, you'll be able to do it as long as you want, but most people won't have that. So the idea of being like just super generous and always just being like, oh yeah, it's all good, bud, you know, that doesn't always work out. So it cuts in a lot of different directions. It's complicated a little bit. But I do know what you mean, that like when clubs have to change directions, or when artists are not what they used to be, you know, everybody has to be realistic and fair.
Right. So what do you got going on right now? And we'll, don't be too specific because I have no idea when this is gonna
30 seconds.
Come out.
How many seconds do I have until?
We're under no actual time limit, but I'm trying to keep them at around an hour.
What am I doing now? I am juggling 2 labels, 2 aliases. You know, producing as much as I can in as many different directions as possible, because I just really, really love the fact that I get to still be in the studio and make music, and nobody can tell me what to do.
Right.
And part of that is enjoying the freedom of not being attached to something that was a filter for all my ideas. I don't have that filter anymore. I don't have anybody saying, "Yep, this isn't what we're feeling right now. This doesn't come out." I have the ability to say, "Well, I'm going to put this out here, or I'll send this to this person, and maybe they'll like it." So, just really, you know, enjoying that freedom for, it's been 3 years now.
Okay. I was just listening the other day. Came onto my need to check.
Oh yeah.
List on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Of like DJ sets. It was a mix you did. Oh, what's the most recent mix you did for something? Was it maybe?
I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of podcasts lately, so it might not be on SoundCloud. Or
yeah, I think it was a podcast mix. It was something
for somebody else.
I think so. You should talk while I look this up. Oh no, it's right here. It's Boiler Room.
The Boiler Room thing. Yeah.
It's tough and. I walked away from the microphone.
Yeah.
It's tough and chunky.
Yeah,
because I haven't actually seen you play for a minute.
Probably a while.
But you did Berghain not that long ago.
Yeah, were you there for that?
I wasn't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard always to say like, oh, well, now I'm like this, because if you're doing the right thing as a DJ, then your circumstances are, what you play is based on where you are and what the context fits. But, I mean, you know, techno's always been there. It's just that the stuff on both of my labels is it's much heavier stuff, much more raw and heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. Some other things that are not completely that way, but that's what the labels are focused on. And that mix in particular was the Upfront series is basically a way for you to show what's coming out on your labels or in your own productions. But I think my stuff is, with the exception of the very early stuff in the first couple of years, my stuff has always been a little on the chunkier, heavier side of, at least of the stuff that I was associated with. It was on the
right.
heavier side of that. But since I left, it's also gone in a couple of different directions. It's fanned out in different ways, because I had an alias called Amber that was very melodic and housey and kind of groovy and a bit more, I don't know, a bit more moody.
Yeah, no, I really like that stuff.
Thank you.
I remember I tried to see you. Actually, I don't even think I physically saw you. I was at Enter the night you played last summer.
Oh, okay.
And, it was like, and I didn't know the set times. You were like first.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got there. I was like, I missed Kevin's set. I'm like, fuck. I'm like, where's Kevin? I'm like, oh, Kevin's gone. Like,
yeah, I was, and I think a lot of people didn't know, because it was supposed to be billed as Amber, aka Ambivalent, but somewhere along the line that didn't happen. So a lot of people didn't know who Amber was, because it was a very new thing at that point. But I did it, and it was fun, because it was fun to be able to play the Terrace, because all the other times that I've played in Ibiza, it's been, you know, kind of like this sort of big room situation. So this was, and I mean, the Terrace is not a small place, not that, but there's a vibe on the Terrace at Space that you can tap into. That's
the scale of that club just.
I mean, that's the thing about Ibiza that I think people miss is, or not miss. Once you've been there, you can't miss it. But I think until you go and actually experience how massive these places are, you don't realize that it's not just like this cool, chill, party vibe, whatever thing. Like, these are festivals. There's like 3 festivals every night for the entire summer, 4 festivals, whatever. You know, like these massive 6,000 to 10,000 person spaces that need to be filled. So it's exceptionally competitive. It's exceptionally aggressive in terms of promoting and money making, and it's I mean, dude, it's Vegas. It's fucking showbiz there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I went was I guess it was 2 or 3 summers ago, but it was the first year they were doing Enter.
Yeah.
And I went to one, and maybe it was the second year. I want to say, okay, probably second year. But they were, you'd heard about the intimate sake bar that opens early, and, the DJs, big name DJs play intimate sets early in the night. And I pictured a bar. Like,
right.
I pictured, or maybe a lounge size thing. And I think like Clark Warner was playing that night, Dave Sumner was doing a thing, and I was like, oh, cool, I want to go there right when it opens at 10, do the, say hi to my friends, da 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 da. I walk in, the room is the size of Motor.
Right.
The intimate sake bar holds 800 people.
Right.
And I remember Rich is behind the bar, and I just walk up to him, I was just like, this is your intimate sake bar. This is your quaint little intimate sake bar. It's the size of Motor. And he just looks at me and goes, where do you see the rest of the place, bro? It was one of those,
I think
I had no concept.
I mean, I can't really speak to how Enter, became what it did, but I do know that people don't until you go to Ibiza, it's hard to understand how.
Yeah, by the way, I don't say any of this mockingly.
No, I know.
It's just more that
I know you're not. I know.
I was so disconnected, and I would think I'd be a pretty connected person, but I had no concept that intimate meant 800 people, which in any market in America is a main room.
And I think that Ibiza is just, that's why Ibiza is unique on so many levels, is that it's different from anywhere else. It's not normal clubbing, it's not normal DJing, it's not normal promoting, it's not normal it's not like normal vacationing either. I mean, people that go down there or spend a season down there, it's a very different way of being.
I don't think I could do it.
Yeah, I don't, people do it, and I think you have to be super young. And when I look back at the stuff that I was doing when I was, 18, 19, 20, and the things that I was up for then that I'm just absolutely not up for now, that gives me a much better understanding of how people are able to go down and spend a season on the island and just be in it, because it is, I can imagine it's pretty exciting in that mode, and it's definitely for that exact reason that it's not like your hometown or it's not like anywhere else. That's a pretty cool thing. But for me as a DJ in Ibiza, I have to be really bluntly honest. What am I trying to say here? It's
not your thing.
It's, well, I can get into it. I can get into it for what it is, but it is not whatever. It's not whatever. I just hear people talk about it or act as if it is the center of the clubbing universe or the center of the electronic music universe or the highlight of the annual calendar. And for me, it's like it might as well be Las Vegas. It's it's glitzy and it's big and it's gaudy and it's over the top, and it has very little to do with what I love about this music. It still works, and there can be great parties. I've been to some amazing parties in Ibiza. Some of them, very few of them, but some of them have been at some of these, super massive clubs. But it's very hard to achieve that vibe. And that's why the people who go and set up these residencies or these big party brands, these experience things, it sucks them in and takes over their lives, and it takes over their careers, and it takes everything from them, because there are millions of euros on the line for this stuff. And if it goes under, nobody's going to let you do it again.
Yeah.
And so it becomes everything, and it's so competitive, and there's so much ego and money and fame on the line that I think it really just, it turns things inside out for people that go there and put their hat in the ring there. And I actually really like it now when I see artists who decide that not worth it for them. Because in the end, I'm kind of like, I think for the most part, that's the right call. Like, once you get in, how do you get out of it? How do you backpedal from being the center, like trying to get to the top of the mountain in this thing that's seen as already the top of the mountain? You're trying to be at the apex of everything there. What you have to do to achieve that can be pretty altering.
And there's always another step. I mean, now there's like in America, there's the festival scene, which dwarfs, the Ibiza club scene.
Yeah, and like,
I mean, do you have any relation to that at all, or?
Do you mean, do I play those? Or
yeah, or do you even play in America that much?
I play in America, but mostly in clubs.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't quite register on the chart in terms of like people who play big stage festival things, particularly in the U.S. And I kind of prefer it that way because I've done those. Having had a history with Minus, I was given the opportunity to play those kinds of things. And when you are 100 feet from the nearest person, and you are playing a 1 hour set in between 12 other people, it's really hard for that to feel like it is the DJ experience. Like that's the experience that you came. It's not the craft that I learned. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not what you spend your years trying to learn how to do. It's a very different art form. There is an art form to it, and the people who are great at it can make it work. And I think once you get thrown into that situation, you have to be great for it or great at it. And that's where
why you're seeing like people really upset with Ricardo because he caught this, like
I saw it and I
bombed at.
I've seen all the furor about it, and I have to. My sense has been that I don't get what the big deal is. I can understand where the programming might have gone differently, where they would have had him before someone else or after someone else or whatever you can say about that. But he's a DJ and he played dance music. And if you can't dance to dance music because it's not what you came for, go to a restaurant and order what you want. But, it's like if anybody expected Ricardo Villalobos to not play a typical Ricardo Villalobos set or not play the kind of music that he believes in and he's passionate about, then you probably don't know much about him. There are DJs who are super versatile, who fit different moments and adapt. And Ricardo is just this like wild bird who, does amazing things. He has inspired me at times more than almost any other DJ. Some of the sets that I've seen him play give you goosebumps still when you think back on them. And the things that he's willing to do as a DJ that don't fit the mold of what big stage, big festival DJ does are kind of what makes him great.
Right.
And, like somebody's been passing around some video of him playing at some after hours where he picks up a needle and scrapes off the dust and puts it back on the record as if that's some kind of crime. And one of the greatest memories I ever have of Detroit and of techno in general was one of the control parties that Rich did where he had Zip and Ricardo come and play, and it was at the City Club. I'm sure you were there.
That was the single greatest party I've ever been to in my entire life.
Unbelievable,
and
right?
There's three of us now. There's me, there's you, and Seth Troxler says it as well.
Okay.
The single greatest party of all time.
And I'm giving myself chills thinking about it. But there was a moment where Ricardo in that room, they literally, for the people who don't have a perspective on it, this was a room that was, I think it's probably like, 100 feet by 100 feet. I mean, not a large room, but large enough to hold. They packed a lot of people in there, but what they did on top of that was brought an outdoor stadium system. It was a system that was meant to broadcast from one end of a stadium to another end.
It was shakedown with the EAW 850 tops and the Serwin Vega bottom.
Yeah. And it was,
which are just like
enormous, punishing. And I just remember at one point, and it was hours and hours and hours and hours into the party, Ricardo just picked up a needle, and you could hear his breath blowing on the needle, and then dropping it back in exactly in time. Like you could keep dancing, and he hit the beat like a scratch DJ, like a turntablist DJ. He had the beat drop exactly right. it shattered me. I've never seen a DJ do that before or after, and I've never forgotten that moment. It was, to me, like the coolest fucking thing a DJ had ever done, and I would never be able to do something that cool in my life. And I was starstruck. And that was what, 2002?
2001. No, 2002, you're right. Yeah.
It was 2002.
Yeah, 2002.
Ricardo was not an international superstar at that point. I don't even know if he was playing DC-10 yet at that point. He was not enormous. He was just a really great DJ at that point. And this was one of those things that, like, you know, people can sit there and they can talk all this shit about him, but whatever they say about him, if you've seen him when he's great, you can't... I can't stomach hearing people slag him off. I'm not saying that I wasn't there to hear his set. I don't know whether he was amazing or he wasn't. I've heard him at times where he wasn't good. I've also heard me at times that I wasn't so good. So I'm not ready to throw someone to the wolves simply because they had a bad set. All I'm saying is, if your criteria is that he didn't play the music that I wanted to hear, well, there are a lot of people out there who take requests. There are a lot of DJs who will play, you know, whatever they think is going to be popular. I believe in a DJ being versatile. I think you should be. But I don't get the sense that, like, whatever he did, that it would be criminal or that it should discount all the brilliant sets that I've heard from him. But, you know, who am I? I wasn't there.
Yeah. So... I could go a million ways with this, but we should probably leave it at that.
Yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, dude, thanks.
Thanks for having me by. Yeah.
That's it for this episode of the Rave Curious podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more conversations with key players in the electronic music community. If you like what you heard on this podcast, let us know. You can give us a shout on Twitter at Rave Curious. You can also like us on Facebook, Rave Curious Podcast. And of course, subscribe on iTunes to make sure you never miss an episode. That's it. Thanks for listening.